Thank you very much for joining us tonight, everybody, and especially to this month's author, Mike Gayle. We're thrilled to have you and thrilled that you wrote such an incredible book.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.
I'm just going to read a very short biography, and then I'm going to hand it over to you to fill in sort of any of the gaps that I've missed, because there is undoubtedly some. You were born in Birmingham to parents from Jamaica, and your younger brother, which is he's a broadcaster.
He's middle one.
Your middle and is the
No,
younger
I'm the
brother
youngest.
of broadcaster. I'm sorry, I got.
That's it. Yeah.
You edited music for Fanzine and joined a Birmingham listings magazine before moving to London and beginning a postgraduate diploma in journalism. Before having his first novel published, he was a features editor and later an agony aunt, which I would love to hear about, for Just 17 and Bliss. As a freelance journalist, he has written for the Sunday Times, The Guardian, The Times, The Daily Express, FHM, More, The Scotsman, and Top of the Pops. Gayle is a chick lit author. We also need to examine that, although he has expressed a dislike for the term. Okay, there we go. Alongside Tony Parsons and Tim Lott, he has also been associated with a new wave of fictions about inadequate young British masculinities. Well, so it's really wonderful to have you here. And
thank you very much for having me.
Like I said, sorry, there was a few more people who just entered. If you do want to ask a question live, please feel free to raise your hand. We do love having our audience chime in. And if you want to use the chat window, you're absolutely welcome to do that. And I will make sure that those questions get asked. But I do have a ton of questions that actually came in through email prior to us meeting here. And of course, they have now completely disappeared off my computer. But Mike, take it away. Tell us all the things that we're missing from that very short synopsis.
Really, what you're missing. So I suppose I have always loved reading. So for me, my kind of journey begins with me the first time I went to my local public library, and I just remember my teacher kind of explaining the concept of libraries to me, that there was this magical place where you could go and get books and take them home and then read them and then take those books back and then get some more books. And so because of that, I was just at the library every week. It was like every Saturday morning, I go to the library, I get books. And I suppose from there, I just felt this kind of kinship with books. I used to kind of lose myself in the pages of books. And so from there, that's where my love for books kind of really kind of came from. And then I did when I was about 18, 17, sorry. I did my A levels, which is, I suppose, I'm not quite sure. Well, about 17, and I do English literature, and I remember kind of thinking to myself, I'm not quite sure why I did English literature, because although I love books, there were a particular kind of books that I loved. And, we were doing sort of Shakespeare and we were doing Thomas Hardy and things like that. And I remember thinking to myself, oh, I'm not really going to get on with this. And then one of the first books we had to read was Tessa de D'Urberville's. And I just remember thinking, oh, this is going to be really boring. I'm going to hate it. And I ended up loving it. And, we had a homework to read a couple of chapters, and I ended up reading half the book because I enjoyed it so much. So I suppose that was another kind of thing along the way. And then I suppose jumped to, university. I did sociology. But while I was at university, I ended up writing for the university magazine. And I suppose that's kind of where I decided I wanted to become a writer. And so cut to a few years later, moved to London to a postgraduate diploma. And while all of my friends wanted to write for the Sunday Times or the Telegraph or one of the big broadsheet newspapers, I was the only one who wanted to write for teenage girls and write for things like Smash Hits and Just 17. And eventually I did. I ended up writing for a magazine called It's Bliss, and essentially teenage girls would write into me with their problems, and I would try my best to fix them. And and that was a really good time. It was it was a really sort of fun sort of writing. And then I then moved to Just 17 as features editor. And I suppose what had happened was that my career had gone very quickly. And I sort of realized that I didn't really know. I was doing less writing now, and I was doing more editing of other people's work. And so I realized that it was going to be what was my next. I was thinking, well, what's my next step? And I knew I didn't want to live in London. And so I thought to myself, all right, okay, well, how about you pick up that book that you wrote when you first moved to London? And so that's what I did, because I wrote about 30,000 words of a novel when I first moved, because I had lots of time in my hands. And I ended up, I worked on that for about a year, and rewrote it probably about 10 or 11 times. And it happened to be the right kind of novel. I sent it to an agent. The agent loved it. We then worked on it for a little bit, and then she sent it out to 7 publishers on a Friday afternoon. And by the Monday morning, we had 2 offers on the table, and it went to an auction. And eventually it went to the publishers who paid the most money, which was obviously very nice, but also seemed to get what I was doing. And so that was 25 years ago. And here I am, still writing books and still loving it.
Wild. That is a wild story. And that is like every author's dream story, right? That well, maybe not the 10 and the 11 times.
I mean, it was just, I remember thinking to myself, I didn't know anybody in publishing, and I knew somebody who was vaguely publishing adjacent, and I remember them telling me, oh, it's really, really difficult. It will never happen. They've got these things called slush piles, which are essentially all the kind of manuscripts that get sent to them. But like I say, it was just one of those things. It was the right sort of novel at the right time, and it was what publishers were looking for. So I've never looked back since.
I think this isn't how I expected the interview to go right now, but I'm going to change the subject slightly, because you and I were discussing you coming into writing in the 90s. And
Yeah,
your book touches, I mean, it's heartwarming, but it also touches on some very profound themes like loneliness and racism. If we look at racism, we've heard from authors before that they had submitted proposals, and their characters were not the characters they were looking for. And
yeah.
I know there's been some movement in the right direction, but recently. So I'd love to hear sort of like your take on sort of like the 90s and what that looked like. And did your earlier books address these really heavy themes?
No, actually, my earlier books were much lighter, and much. I suppose they were essentially romantic comedies in a kind of form. And I suppose I wasn't as much concerned. One of the things that I didn't want to do was to be put in a box.
Mm.
And so, and I suppose it just became, it's sort of an extension of my journalism. So I was never a black journalist. I was always a journalist who happened to be black. And so wasn't writing about black issues. I was just writing about, writing for teenage girls. So, I was writing articles about relationships, writing articles that made them kind of laugh and smile and things like that. And so because of that, I wanted, when I wrote a novel, like I wanted to I was very conscious of not letting anybody put me in a box. And so, because the thing is, it's great. There are authors who want to talk about the black experience and want to talk about um, race and things like that, and that was absolutely fine. But what I didn't want, and what I do think is wrong, is when that's the only time they get a voice. And I've seen it happen in journalism, where certain authors are kind of wheeled out to talk about certain subjects, and then, but they never get to talk about general subjects. They never talk about anything outside of race. And so, because of that, I was conscious of really wanting to set my stall out as wide as possible, so that nobody could put me in a box. And so it took me a while to kind of address race, and it kind of happened in a kind of gradual way, you know. And I suppose All the Lonely People was the first time that I was thinking to myself, when I just finished one book and I was thinking about starting All the Lonely People, and I knew that I wanted to write a book about loneliness, and I knew that I wanted the character to be somebody who doesn't normally get written about in books. And so when I was thinking, I ended up thinking about my parents and my parents' generation. And so I just thought, it just sort of came to me that he should be this kind of Jamaican pensioner. And it was just the right time for me to talk about race, because and what was nice about that was that because I'd never been pigeonholed in that way. It meant that I could then do it and not be defined by it. There was a really interesting article by Monica Ali when she was talking about how she wrote Brick Lane, and she wrote another book about the kind of Indian community. So all the Pakistani community. So there were two books, and then she did a third book, I think it was, that was about Princess Diana, and it didn't do very well. And she was very aware of the fact that it didn't do very well, and people were very conscious of the fact that where's the book about it, the Pakistani community, and so as much as people say, yes, we're broad mind, of course you're an author, of course you can write about whatever you want. Actually, she was essentially being told by the kind of wider readership, no, we want you to go back to writing about the Pakistani community. And so it's quite limiting as an author, I think, to kind of have someone dictate to you what you can and can't write about. And so that's it makes me think, actually I did the right thing, because now I can write about whatever I want, which is the same right and same things that white authors or authors who are of color can get to write about anything they want, and so should authors of color too.
Thank you. I think that I posted the right article by Monica Ali in the chat, if anybody wants to check that out. So let's go back to the theme of loneliness. So you've written numerous best-selling novels, but what inspired you specifically to explore the theme of loneliness in this book?
It was one of the things that was just on my mind when I just finished my previous book, and I knew that my subject was going to be loneliness. And I suppose it was because it seemed to be one of those things that was just in the air. In the UK, they just appointed or the newspaper's calling it a loneliness czar, somebody to in government who was focused on doing something about loneliness. And we were reading about how there are more single person households in the UK now than ever, and so loneliness was just one of those things that seemed to be churning around in the background, and it just seemed to be the kind of right sort of. It seemed to be something I had something to say about. But what was interesting was that when the book actually came out in the UK, so I'd already written it, and then just as the book had come out in the UK, we went into lockdown, and so suddenly this book about loneliness seemed to be actually talking about the loneliness that we were all experiencing globally. And it's quite a strange thing, because obviously I'm not psychic, but and yet it was the perfect book for that time, because suddenly, if you'd have thought about people who were lonely, you might have thought about, stereotypically, you might have thought about the elderly. But then suddenly, all sorts of different people were experiencing loneliness in all its different forms because we all had to stay home. And one of the things I really wanted to kind of get out in All the Lonely People was that actually it's not just the elderly who are lonely, but actually all sorts of different people in all sorts of different situations can find themselves to be very, very lonely.
It's certainly something that we're familiar with here in book club. One of the main factors that our members come out is to cure this global problem. Juanita, I will ask your question. I'm just going to continue because that's going to send us in a different direction. So I'm going to continue with this book specifically, but I will definitely get to that before. I do want to talk about humor because it's a recurring element in your writing. And even when you're exploring very sensitive topics, how do you strike a balance between addressing serious issues such as loneliness while still injecting your trademark wit and humor into the narrative?
I think the kind of I think the reason why my writing works so well is that it's not just one tone.
Mm.
Um, and what I love to do is that I feel that a really good description of my books of my writing style is or the experience of reading one of my books is being on a roller coaster. And so I love that kind of sense of having all these different emotions one after the other. So you could have people laughing at one moment and then turn a scene on its head and then have them gasping in the next. And so there's that lovely kind of juxtaposition of different emotions. So you're not just feeling sadness all the way through. You're not just feeling happiness. You've got those contrasts constantly where, like I say, you can be laughing one minute or crying the next, or you can be, just really taking a moment to kind of savor a particular scene and then find yourself belly laughing in another scene just because of, so it's a lovely mixture. It's not just a one note thing. It's, there's lots of contrast, I think. And that's really important to me.
So what, if you had to choose a genre, because I know this chick lit thing is off the table here. So if you had to choose a genre, what genre would you say that your books are typically?
Oh, that's a good question. I suppose I don't know. I mean, they're books about people and they're books about life and they're books about people trying to make sense of life. Well, yeah. So, is that a genre? People trying to make sense of life, or
No.
people in difficult situations? Yeah, I don't know. I think it's about
Contemporary
people.
fiction?
Contemporary fiction, yes, yeah, we can call it that. Yeah, yeah. You should work in publishing.
I feel like every publisher, whoever publishes a book, needs to put a label on it, right? So
Yes, yeah, and I get it. I mean, labels are there to kind of so many books are published, and so labels just help you kind of find what you're looking for. The downside of labels is that they help you find what you're looking for. There's the wonderful thing about bricks and mortar bookshops is that lovely feeling of just going into especially a secondhand bookshop where the books are just all scattered. There's no rhyme or reason to them, and you just go in and you discover stuff.
yeah.
The thing is, if you say I like psychological fiction, psychological thrillers, and I'm only going to read psychological thrillers, that's fine. But at some point, you're going to get very, very bored of them.
Mm.
And secondly, you need a little bit of variation, and you don't know what you're missing out on.
Yeah.
And I think the secret of the wonderful thing about book clubs is that they kind of get you out of your comfort zone because a lot of reading ends up being about being in your comfort zone. I like this. I just want something that's like this, but a bit like that. And with a book club, you can kind of, you end up being forced to kind of read different things. And it's absolutely fine to not like something, but even in the not liking of it, you're experiencing something different. You're seeing a slightly different perspective, so if you don't like history novels and suddenly you're reading a history novel, you're experiencing that. And so actually, for sure, okay, it wasn't my thing. But then equally, you could read a genre that I don't really read sci-fi, and then you read a sci-fi, but you go, actually, that was really good. And also, you kind of we carry around these ideas of what sci-fi is or what historical fiction is, and actually, and it's only when you start reading them, you actually go, actually, this is a really wide genre in itself. You think of you could with sci-fi, you could read an Afrocentric novel at one end, or you could read Isaac Asimov at the other, and there's lots of things in between. So yeah, I think it's important to kind of get out of your comfort zone with reading, definitely.
When you said that, it reminded me we read sci-fi as well, but we read it once a year because we have this really adverse reaction to sci-fi. But we read Blake Crouch, and I can't count the number of emails I got that said, "Was this
Yeah,
really sci-fi? He's great."
exactly.
Awesome. Okay, so before we leave, sort of like the subject of loneliness, I just want to ask this question here. Loneliness is a prevalent issue in today's society, and your book sheds light on this often overlooked topic. How do you think literature, specifically novels like All the Lonely People, can help start conversations and create awareness around such important social issues?
Well, the interesting thing is that I in this wonderful day and age, I get people can finish a book and just get on their computers or on their phones and just email the author. Um, and I've had countless, and I do mean countless, emails from people who have literally just finished reading All the Lonely People, who have said, I'm going to be different. I'm going to be like Hubert. I'm going to be, like Ashley. I'm going to start talking to my neighbours. And people have done it. And I think, I suppose what fiction can do is show us what's possible and show us, because I think, again, in life, we can kind of get stuck in our lane and, we're just thinking about getting from A to B and with as little hassle as possible. And then you can read about somebody's life and experience their life in a way that you can't do. Um, even with TV, you can get a sense of somebody's life, but I think there's something really intimate about reading a novel and reading a novel that's about someone's life in the way that All the Lonely People is. You can end up really, all the differences. So you might not be an 80-year-old Jamaican pensioner living in London, but you are a human being and you can connect and you can imagine what it's like to feel like that. And I think because of that, it can really inspire you to just want to do better and be better. Um, and it's already happened, and it's lovely. It's a really lovely thing to hear people say, do you know what? I am going to try and be more like these fictional characters. And I think it's just people just need encouragement. I think so many people want to do better, want to reach out and want to end loneliness and want to be more inclusive, but they're scared. And I think fiction can just kind of give you that little gentle push to say, go on, have a go, see what happens. And they have, and they've done it and they've loved it and they're going to keep on doing it, which is lovely.
All your characters were, I mean, so incredible and so diverse. From Hubert, who we all absolutely adore. But oh my goodness, Rose, I don't even think I can talk about it. That was a hard chapter to read. Um,
It was a hard chapter to write.
I bet. I bet. Uh, well, so one of the key aspects of All the Lonely People is the ability to resonate with readers on a deep emotional level. Could you tell us about your own emotional journey while writing this book and how it may have influenced your narrative?
I suppose um, I mean, it's not a book about me, but it is a book about, um, I suppose, my parents' generation. And so when I was researching All the Lonely People, I did, there's so many things you kind of take for granted. And then it's only when you kind of look at it through the lens of doing research for a novel that it made me kind of think about, my parents and what they might have experienced. Pardon me. And so, I remember, I watched a lot of films. I watched a lot of documentaries about the experience of West Indians coming from the West Indies to the UK. At the UK's invitation, I should add. So, these people being invited to come and work because there aren't enough people to do the work because of the war, and generally being met with hostility and anger, but not always. There were some positive things, and so it really made me kind of think about what it might have been like for my parents. And so very much I was putting in when I was writing the book, I was thinking about these things and talking to my parents about the things that they'd gone through. And in terms of the kind of emotions of the book, I suppose, I really, Hubert was one of those characters that I really kind of resonated with. And, when I'm a planner. So when I was planning the book, um, when I realized, where the book was going and what might happen, I did find it quite difficult because, he's a character that I just wanted good things for, but, part of being an author is making bad things happen to good characters in order for them to kind of bring out their kind of their true nature and for them to see what they're made of. So yeah, it was a really enjoyable book to write, and a really interesting book to write. And I think I learned a lot in the process of writing it.
I wanted Joyce and Hubert to just get on the boat and go back to Jamaica because they were. I was like, why? Why do you want to live there? Don't live there anymore.
Yes.
I feel like they would have had a much easier go of things if they had have been back in Jamaica.
Possibly, but it's you know I suppose the point is that you know Joyce wants. I suppose Joyce wants her children to kind of have. Joyce had a good childhood, or at least she felt like she had a good childhood, so she wants the best for her kids. And I suppose Hubert probably feels or felt that he'd kind of made the commitment to this country, and so he's just trying to make the best of it. As he's got they bought a home, they've raised their kids. It is home, and the thing is, things do get better.
Yeah.
They do get better. And what's really lovely, is that observation that Hubert makes when he's in the park, when he's in the park with Layla and the pram, and I'm forgetting my character's name, and he first sees, what's her name?
Jan.
Jan, that's it. Thank you, Rita. He first sees Jan. There's that moment, she doesn't, he's there with this kind of blonde-haired, blue-eyed child in a pram, and he just thinks to himself, no one blinks an eye. And, what a difference that kind of 50 years has sort of made. And so, there is light at the end of the tunnel, I think, and things do get better. I suppose, that's part of, and again, when we get to the end of the novel, and when Hubert meets his grandniece,
Yeah.
that's a really lovely moment as well, which kind of shows you that things change, things do get better, that they're not always going to be terrible.
Well, so there are a lot of relationships, and I mean, that is what the book is about, all the relationships. So you explore various relationships and connections that characters form. Which character dynamics were the most interesting for you to write?
It has to be Hubert and Ashley, just because they are like chalk and cheese. Hubert the thing I like about Hubert is he seems to be baffled by a lot of modern life. And it reminds me a little bit of my parents, who sometimes are quite baffled by modern life. And so when I was writing Hubert, I was just like thinking, my parents don't really, for instance, when they go to McDonald's, my parents have literally never been in the McDonald's, and they would just they would not know what to do with any of it at all. And it's just strange. It's some revolutions have kind of just missed a certain generation, and so it's quite there's so Cuba is this kind of, he's almost like an alien. He feels like he's like an alien in this kind of modern world. And then there's Ashley, who's just this kind of dynamo, and she is just full on from the get go. And there's this lovely, beautiful clash where he doesn't really understand her, and I'm not sure if she really understands him, but they just connect, and they just, they kind of drawn together in each other's gravity, and gradually, they learn more about each other. So it was just a lot of fun to kind of write their interactions, and to write Ashley's character, and to write you. And so yeah, that would definitely be the one.
This is just a comment from my actual own book club. We met last
Oh
week,
yeah.
and they wanted me to tell you that they were very unhappy that Hubert only lived for 1 year after 18 months.
It was such a difficult one, and I think, and I actually spoke to, I had a message from one of your Gloss members, and we had a little chat about it, about this very subject. And I suppose the thing, I was thinking about a couple of things. I was thinking about, chiefly, I wanted the novel to kind of span a beginning, middle, and end of an entire life. And while it is sad that Hubert passes away, I think the thing that I had at the forefront of my mind is what a difference, if, say, Hubert only had the time that's in the book plus a year, if Ashley hadn't have knocked on his door, and he hadn't responded in the way that he'd responded, or eventually kind of come to her aid, he would have spent his last final years just in that house.
Mm.
And when he passed away, as kind of Jan alludes to, towards the end of the book, when if he had a funeral, who would have been there? Because he would have lost contact with all of his old friends. There's no family. Who would have been there? And as it is, it's standing room only when he passes away. And so it's a kind of a really, yes, he only had a limited amount of time, but he did so much with it. He actually, in that time, he got to really, really live. And so that was, again, at the kind of forefront of my mind, I suppose.
It also made it more realistic, to be honest.
Yeah,
And he lives 20 more years.
yeah. That's
Rita, yes, I thought this as well at the beginning, and then it goes off on a whole tangent. But Rita says the novel reminded me a bit of A Man Called Ove. Have you had that comparison before?
I've had that comparison, and bizarrely, and you're gonna be, I've not read it.
Ah,
Um, I've not read it, so I feel like I should, but now I've it was, I suppose, the thing is, if you know, the interesting thing is, if you, I started with Hubert, a grumpy old man, so
mhm.
I needed a foil, which is Ashley, and I knew what was going to happen, and I suppose when you kind of put those elements together, you might get a kind of similar sort of thing. But from what I can gather from the reviews that I read, is that while there might be kind of superficial um, kind of similarities, they are very very much different books, and which is good. Which just means that there's
The cat too.
yeah. Yeah. Yes. Well. Now the interesting thing about the cat is that my I'm very much a dog person, and I can very much imagine myself being like you because I'm not a cat fan. Don't offend anybody, but I'm not a cat fan, and my parents aren't cat fans either. So I really love this idea of um, my dad is definitely, was definitely not a cat fan at all, and he was very house, he was very proud of his garden, and was always kind of trying to stop cats from. So just the idea of this kind of cat adopting Hubert very much against his will is firstly very cat-like. Cats are only interested in people who do not like them because they see it as a challenge. Cats. If you're interested in a cat, they're just like, I don't care about you. Find me the person in this room who doesn't like me, and that's the lap I want to sit on. And anytime I've got friends who've got cats, and their cats will always sit in my lap because they know I don't like them.
So now let's just change course. We've got a little bit of time left. Let's just change course. Let's ask this question that's been with us for most of the interview. Besides All the Lonely People, which of your books do you wish everyone would read? Great question.
Oh, right. It would have to be. Oh, right. It would have to be. It would have to be. I wrote the book before All the Lonely People is a book called He Forgets. It's a book called Half a World Away, and it's not out in the States, but that is a really really wonderful book. Yeah, so read that, but also read the Museum of Ordinary People as well because it's got a gloss sticker on it. So it comes already pre-endorsed.
And well, that's my next question. So you can just segue right into that. What is your new book about, and why should we read it?
The Museum of Ordinary People is about Jess, who's really she's very lost, and she's in a relationship that's not very great, and she lost her mum a year earlier, and she has had to clear her mum's house, and so we get flashbacks to her clearing her mum's house after her mum passes away. But while she manages to kind of find homes for lots of different things from her mum's home, the one thing she can't find a home for is a set of encyclopedias that mean a great deal to her. They've got no value. They're falling apart, and they've sat by her front door for nearly a year because she doesn't know where to put them, but she doesn't want to get rid of them. But anyway, things come to a head, and she's about to get rid of them when her friend tells her about a place that exists called the Museum of Ordinary People, and it's a museum that's dedicated to preserving the belongings of ordinary people, and this basically sets a fire under her, and she falls in love with this place. She goes to see it, she falls in love with it, and she wants to turn it into an actual museum. And it's, I suppose, it's that kind of, that similar to All the Lonely People. It's about finding the extraordinary in the ordinary. It's about the sort of objects that connect us to our family, our friends, our loved ones. And while they might not have any value, intrinsic value, they have a value that deserves recognition. And it's about kind of memories and objects, and treating all people as if, you know, they were worthy of having things in museums. So that's it in a nutshell.
Okay, that's great. So everybody should go and grab a copy of that. Absolutely. We want to know, oh, am I, okay, no, we're good. What else are you working on? Is there something we can anticipate in the near future, or? Can you hear me? Oh, can everybody hear me? Mike cannot hear me.
Yes.
You can, okay. Mike, you can't hear me, I'm assuming. He's looking very confused. You can't hear anything? We can't even hear you. It's weird. No. That is really random. That's really strange that it just stopped working.
I can maybe help.
Sure.
If you click on the up arrow next to the microphone in the bottom left corner, there's an up arrow next to your mic or mute icon in the bottom left. If you click on the up arrow, you just want to make sure your microphone and speaker are set to the same thing.
I just clicked mine. Thank you, Rita.
Or worst case scenario, he can dial in with his phone and at least get the audio from that. But he probably, I don't know if he can hear us.
Yeah. Can you hear us? I'm gonna think no. Sorry, guys.
Yeah,
We're
sometimes
almost done.
exiting and coming back in will help.
Okay, well, we'll try that if it doesn't. I was just gonna ask him about what he's working on, and if there's anything that he recommends. So
I'm guessing he'll rejoin.
it's just weird that it.
In the UK. But at the moment, I don't. It's quite hard to kind of talk about books that are I've not really finished, so I always find it quite difficult to kind of explain it. But what I can talk about is my next book in the UK, which is called A Song of Me and You, and so that's coming out in the UK as well next week. In fact, yeah. So. Yes, you're a little bit behind in the US, but you know, I'm sure we'll catch up at some point.
Amazing. And well, Carlotta writes a very nice message here to you if you have a second to just read that.
Oh, please. Where's that? Is that in the chat?
Yeah, it is. I can read it to you if you like.
Oh, please do. Yeah, go on then.
Kudos to you, Mike, for creating a book that was introspective and entertaining. Your characters were layered with which one may know something someone similar to their traits. I do not see the story as being about race, but rather a lesson of humanity. History shows the attitude of people of those times. Unfortunately, they were not all kind. Those instances did help you understand Hubert and Joyce, as well as the trials they went through. I really enjoyed the book and will definitely recommend it.
Thank you so much. That's very kind of you. And I think, I think it's a very good point that you kind of make there, that, you know, and I suppose it kind of speaks to, it's not just about race. It's about, I suppose it's about, the lovely thing about older people is that they've, by definition, if you get to your 80s, you've got stories to tell and you've experienced many, many different things. And I think, whoever you are and wherever you are, that there's a really lovely thing about trying to connect with our kind of older generation and hearing those stories and listening to those stories, because, these people have been alive for a long time and they've experienced so many things, and, they've all got stories to tell. I think that, I think that's a really wonderful thing.
It's funny you touch on the intergenerational part of it, because like that's one of the things with book clubs. Like there's not a lot of times in your life where you're actually put into an environment where you get to chat with people that are of different generations, and it's really, really lovely, and something that we really love as part of the book club. So can definitely attest to that. Mike, last thing. Can you let me know if you're reading anything you think we should read by any other authors, or if you have any favorite authors?
Yes, I can. So we were talking earlier about Audible. So I'm listening to a lot of books these days, and because of that, I can never remember what I'm actually reading unless I actually open up the app and have a little look. But recently, I've enjoyed one in particular, which is called, let me see if I can find it. Oh, In the Blink of an Eye, by Joe Callahan. And it's a kind of it's an interesting kind of sort of take on a kind of police procedural, because it's about a kind of a UK police officer, a female police officer, who is partnered with an AI, and they have to kind of solve cases together. And it was a really good book. Really enjoyed it. So and that was something a little bit different. So that was something I've read recently that I enjoyed.
It's got very good reviews, and that truly brings me to my last question, because we're all on Goodreads. We all look at all the ratings before we read books and stuff, and your ratings are exceptionally high. I know that. So I just wonder if you are, lots of authors won't read them at all. Are you someone who reads the reviews?
So I used to read reviews, and I used to read everything, and then just spend. Then I realized that I was letting somebody just have my day. If I saw a bad review, it would just really put me in a bad mood all day. And so I discovered it might be a year or two ago, probably more so. Just the idea, I made a pact with myself that if I really had to read a review, I was only going to read 5-star reviews. And so now it's a completely different thing. I love reading reviews. I only read 5-star reviews though. So I don't even read 4-star reviews. No, not even a 3-star. Nothing is getting in apart from 5 stars. So if you wholeheartedly love my books, I will have read your review. If you give me even 4.5 stars, not a chance. I won't have seen it. I ignore it.
I think that's brilliant.
You got to look after yourself ultimately.
Absolutely. Well, thank you everybody so much for joining us today, and thank you, Mike, for writing such a beautiful book, and I can't wait to read what comes next. And
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Take care.